Man, today on the podcast, we talking about the Billy Graham rule. So if you feel strongly about that one way or another, this may not be an episode for you, but I will argue that it's definitely an episode for you if you feel strongly one way or another. So I just want to. No, I think that
it sounds like you said both things. I don't know. This sounded weird.
This is what I mean. This is what I mean. Like you say some things like just to give people trigger warnings and stuff like that.
Okay.
But I think that sometimes like it doesn't require a trigger warning. And if you feel super strongly about something, then
maybe
like
you should be listening.
You should probably hear a different perspective. Like that's kind of what I mean when I say that. So it's like, hey, just so you know, but also
Trigger
this
warning.
is probably for you if you don't want to listen to the whole episode because you just got triggered in some capacity.
Most definitely.
So yeah. So we can just jump into it. I feel like
absolutely
this has kind of been something that's been kind of questioned by a lot of people in like more progressive Christian spheres. I said spheres.
It's fine.
But let's go ahead and define what the Billy Graham rule is.
Before we do that, let me tell you who Billy Graham is. All right.
That's cool.
Billy Graham, if you don't know. So he was a televangelist from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Man, this guy used to preach, and I believe he was sent by God to preach because he used to fill stadiums up for decades, blessing people and saving people all across the world. And regardless of how you feel about the man, he was an older white man, but regardless of how you feel about him, he was impactful. So that's who Billy Graham is.
Yeah. So, look that man up. Maybe you heard of him, maybe you hadn't, but you can find a lot of interesting stuff. But as far as the Billy Graham rule, it's defined as an extra biblical Christian practice among men in which they avoid spending time alone with women to whom they are not married. So let's be clear. This is primarily for men, but I think also women. But I think it's primarily for men, at least by definition, the Billy Graham rule, right? But I think that you could even say that it's an extra biblical Christian practice amongst believers in which they avoid spending time alone with the opposite sex of which they are not married. I think that's probably like the easiest definition that there is, right?
Yeah, sure. And it's supposed to curb the likelihood of sexual immorality and also shun the appearance of evil. So that it's also supposed to keep people from assuming what's going on between you and this woman you're not married to.
Yeah, it's almost like eliminating reasonable doubt.
Yes.
Yeah, or I'm sorry, giving reasonable doubt. Like I doubt this happened.
Giving reasonable doubt or eliminating reasonable. Okay.
It's giving.
Okay, I think I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
words, man, they're so hard, aren't they?
Look, it's one of them days, man. We sorry. More so, I'm sorry because I'm the one that's tripping. But with that being said, though, like the idea is that, like again, like this is supposed to kind of make it to where it doesn't even look like you're cheating on your spouse. You don't even want to make it even look like that. And I've heard some people even say like, I want to honor my spouse in this way. So I'm not gonna make it even look like I'm violating my spouse or violating my covenant with my spouse. So that's how some people would define it. And I think that it was generally accepted as wide practice amongst a lot of believers up until probably recently. By recently, I mean the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to see, and it's super interesting to see it come back up. And the reason it's come back up is because of Matt Chandler. Matt Chandler being pretty much a megachurch pastor, pretty much a celebrity pastor. Maybe not by looks a celebrity pastor, but by status, by books, by congregation size, by people who know him. Definitely a celebrity pastor.
Definitely.
More so on the humble side, I guess you can say. So he's not bragging about his belongings. He's not you won't see him on sneakers and preachers or anything like that. So he really resonates well with a bunch of millennial Christians who have seen so much hypocrisy. He seemed kind of a safe space for those people, I would say. And just really knowledgeable too, a great teacher, a great leader, so on and so forth. And it's just the last person you would think would be caught up in something like this. So basically what happened was he stepped on stage. He said he was going to step aside for a little minute. He also emphasized that he plans on being the pastor there for the next 20 years because he's been a pastor for 20 years already. but he emphasized that before he started speaking. And then he kind of just talked about how he violated their social media policy by communicating with somebody who was not his wife. And they said it was the content and the frequency, but he also said it was not romantic in nature. He said there was nothing romantic about it, but like some coarse language. That's the words that they used. Coarse language and just the frequency of communicating with one another. So he said that he knew about it. His wife knew about the conversations. He said the woman who he was involved in conversations with, he said that her husband knew about the conversations, which kind of led to like people asking the question of like, well, why are you stepping down? And allegedly, or he said that the friend of a woman confronted him at the church one Sunday and said, this is not cool. And he kind of said that he took that immediately to the elders. The elders did an investigation. And the conclusion of their investigation, they included like phone messages. He had to surrender his phone, laptop, devices, so on and so forth, to just make sure they had the full picture. The conclusion they came to is that he violated their social media policy. I don't know what their social media policy is, but but people, pretty much everybody landed at the spot of this is an extension of the Billy Graham rule, and we're not even sure if this is even like applicable because it was nothing romantic in nature, but they did have a lot of conversations. So people kind of said that like either there's a scandal going on, or they just are overreacting to something that doesn't need overreaction. And, he apologized to his family and stuff like that. And people said that maybe he should apologize to her family for them being embarrassed and so on and so forth. But like, it just kind of like was kind of surprising. And then Preston Sprinkle, who also is pretty well known, he talks about like a lot of gender issues and things like that. That's like his kind of calling card. But he has a conference every year, and people like Jackie Hill Perry, Street Hymns, Matt Chandler, people like that go to the conference. So he sent an email and kind of just said like, hey, I've looked extensively into this. Basically, he said, I've talked to Matt Chandler twice and talked to a woman who's been on staff at the church for over 18 years. He said he can't share the private details, but he will share that it's being portrayed pretty bad. And it's really like the church's messaging that kind of just made it seem so bad. Right. So like, and then he said the coarse joking was jokes about alcohol, not sexual innuendos or lewd jokes. And the big issue was his DM relationship seemed too familiar for someone that he didn't know terribly well in person. He basically violated the Billy Graham rule. So this is what somebody said who was kind of associated with it. So it does like all fall back to the Billy Graham rule. So when you hear that, like, what do you think?
Well, my first thought is, we're talking about Matt Chandler, who's a pastor. So just from him being a pastor, I find it to be, my first thought is that it's weird that he's being punished for this. And part of the reason why is because, like, if you're a pastor, then your business is people's souls. Like, what you're called to do is minister to people. That's men and to women. And to do so, that requires a whole lot of contact and communication with people. I mean, that's your job. Like, it seems odd to me that if the woman that you're ministering to didn't complain of anything, and they did an investigation and they didn't find anything, that was inappropriate, that you would have to then step down. It's almost like it just comes across a little bit weird to me.
And step aside. So he does plan on being back. He's not necessarily stepping down, because I think that communicates that he that kind of communicates that like he's fired or he quit. He's just stepping aside to like basically go on a forced sabbatical, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
but I think like also too, like, the question is for me is like the Billy Graham rule. Like, now I do think there may be a little bit of wisdom to it, and I'll get into that later. But like, my first thought is just like, does it really work to curb sexual immorality? Like, to like prevent sexual immorality? Does not meeting with women, not talking to women alone work to prevent gossip that you may be cheating on your wife, without stopping you from being a pastor to this woman. Because I feel like it's difficult to be a pastor to someone, get them to be fully, transparent with you as their pastor. If someone's sitting over here listening to the whole conversation, like if you got a woman in your church who's struggling with something, she's coming to the pastor to talk to him about it, and his assistants just sit in the corner.
Yeah.
She might not be able to really tell what's going on. I don't know. It just seems like it would be a hindrance to your job. But I don't know. What do you think? What are your initial?
Yeah, and just going into that conversation, because like I'm a school counselor, so like I frequently had like thoughts of like working in the church as a counselor if a position ever became available, because I think that it would like take some of the handcuffs off of me to some capacity that like exists like in a school setting. But like the conclusion I came to was that I will never take a counseling job at a church if they're not going to hire a woman counselor in addition to me.
Yeah.
And I say that just because like there are not many safe spaces for women at church. When you think about it, like they're not going to share everything with a male that they may share with a female. So or a woman, I'm sorry. But like with that, like that's like one of my first thoughts is like that. But I think that there is like a difference though, because I think that like they're saying like, I think there's a difference between like communication with somebody and like DM communication with somebody and like the frequency of it and of you being like kind of concerned about that. Cause like we still don't know the contents of like, what I'm saying, the actual messages. Like we can assume what they are, but we still don't know what they are. So like we don't know what was said, and we don't know like what their social media policy is even. So like what is their social media policy? You are a pastor and an elder at the church, so you already know what the policy is. So you know what I'm saying? So you, right or wrong, you violate the rules. So that's tough. When it comes to the Billy Graham rule, like I think that there is wisdom in it. But I think that like this is just Darius Ryon speaking, not Ryan Thomas. So like take it up with me if you got an issue with it. But I think that it's presumptuous to start off with. I think that like I think there is wisdom in it. I think that it works for some people. But at the same time, I think it's presumptuous that like if you are a male or a female and you are with somebody for a certain amount of time, then you're gonna lust after them to some capacity, and then you're gonna eventually kind of like cheat or put yourself in a compromising situation. Position. Like that's position, and that's like assuming that the other person is also gonna have the exact same feelings. That's kind of odd to me, and I think it also like doesn't deal well with people who may be same sex attracted or anything like that, because like are they only supposed to meet with men, or are they supposed to meet with nobody, or women that they consider ugly? Like what you tell me like so I think that like in 2022 when we're actually considering things, I don't think that it necessarily does what it's supposed to do, and I don't think it's practical in a lot of ways, because I'm a school counselor. And 80% of the people in my building over the course of my career, maybe even 90%, have been women. And it's been situations where I've been alone in a room with women. But like, I don't think that like I've ever like dishonored my wife in that. Like I'm literally doing my job.
Yeah, right.
So like, if you work as a manager at some business, you're probably going to have, if you're a manager, you're probably going to have people of opposite sex that work with you. And at some point you will have to have like, conversations alone. So what does that look like? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think some jobs like just require you to have that. And we could always look at Jesus. But I think that like, it's kind of a cheat code to look at Jesus because he was perfect. So like he was sinless, you know what I'm saying? So we can always look at like his relationship with women, so on and so forth, but like that's not necessarily fair. But at the same time, it still shows that like there is space for you to have relationships with some women, especially like as long as we're in the model of like they're only male pastors and stuff like that, like you're going to be directly responsible for somebody of the opposite sex's salvation. And like, what happens next? You know what I'm saying? Like these are just like legit questions that I have because I don't know what the answer is. But I'm not like the biggest fan of the Billy Graham rule. It's the first Sunday of football, y'all. Jimmy Graham used to play tight end, so it's one of these days. But I think I just got so many questions, and I think that like we'll go ahead and I'll tell you one of my last thoughts.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good questions, and to just continue to critique a little bit, some women actually think that this rule can actually hinder their progression in their career or their opportunities because certain leaders don't want to sit with them alone to discuss business or like business ventures or business opportunities, which is a valid concern. And then you also have the issue being that it seems to reduce a woman to nothing more than a walking, talking temptation. You know what I mean? Like she's a sin waiting to happen. You know what I mean? Like, and that can be kind of dehumanizing in a way to where it's like, why can't I go into these rooms and meet with certain people because because of who I am, basically. You know what I mean? And so those are legitimate concerns that I've seen brought up about this rule. And I think, like I said, I do think there may be some wisdom in it at certain times, but it's the absolute aspect of things. Like, there's no situations. Are there ever any times where this is appropriate? You know what I'm saying? Or is it just the absolute never, don't do this or type situation? And I think that with Matt Chandler, the Me Too movement, I feel like, was definitely something that opened up a lot of people's eyes in regards to how they move and the decisions they make with the opposite sex, especially, and especially when there's a power inequality in in that relationship. Power inequality relationships are super sensitive, and some men may just think like, hey, I want someone to be there to make sure there's no false accusations brought against me or whatever for my own protection. And I can kind of understand that perspective, right? Because we've heard plenty of accusations in the Me Too movement that prove to be untrue. Like I think about Joseph in the Bible with Potiphar's wife.
Hey, we gonna do an episode on that. We're gonna do an episode on Me Too. So let's save some of that. Let's save some of that
fire for that. Okay. But so I think that is definitely something that causes people to like rethink these rules that really they're put there for the protection of both parties. So I understand the intention is good, well-meaning rule, right? But it seems to have some major limitations, especially if you're a pastor. I haven't even really thought about it outside of being a pastor.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I think that like one of my first real life interactions with seeing a problem with the Billy Graham rule and seeing it applied to like the workplace specifically. There was a politician from Mississippi, of course, but a politician from Mississippi. There was a journalist who wanted to kind of follow him around in his campaign and kind of just like write about it. And a journalist for a newspaper in Mississippi, which like automatically tell you she ain't making no money. But with that being said, he was like, I mean, let's just keep it a book. Let's keep it a book. So like, but his response was, okay, we can do this, but you're going to have to bring another journalist with you, of the opposite sex. And you're going to have to pay for that. And I'm only paying you to do this.
Yeah.
So like, just how problematic that is, bro. You're doing a whole campaign. You are a politician, fool. I didn't tell you to go into that career. That's kind of on you. Like, you should have enough money where you should have somebody around you. Like, you tell me what the deal is with you at this point. So like, those one of the first times I've seen it to where I was like, dang, man, I don't know. Yeah. But let's kind of talk about like good reasons to have a Billy Graham rule. Cause I got another thought that's kind of like, kind of challenging it a little bit, but I don't want the whole episode to be like we going in on the Billy Graham rule. Good reasons to have the Billy Graham rule. I think that like if you have a partner who has a history of just being out there for the streets. Give me a better word than for the streets. Give me a better word than for the streets.
That's the perfect word, but I would say that they have a history of infidelity.
History of infidelity. We'll stick with that. But let's say this partner has a history of infidelity or even temptation with infidelity. Like I almost cheated on my spouse because I was in this situation or because I was around this person and I just became attracted to this person. Then you probably, should like have that in place. I think another example of having that in place is if you are in a time of discontentment or unhappiness in your marriage. Like, I think that it makes plenty of sense to have that rule in place, because if you are not content, if you feel like somebody's not leading you or doing their job, so to speak, then you are probably on shaky grounds as to what you may do, honestly. So that as well. And I think that like there can be other examples too. Do you got any other examples that may come into play, like where it may be a good idea to have like a Billy Graham rule to where it may actually be like beneficial?
Yeah, man. I think what you said was very good, man. I mean, any types of issues where you know yourself and you know how your struggles are, the way your struggles set up as a man, that you know, it could possibly benefit you to apply that rule, you know, to where it's like, hey, we can meet, but let's go to Starbucks and meet somewhere public where other people are around us, you know, not necessarily listening to us, but they can see us. Or like having someone, you know, either like in the room with us if we're in an office or something, or somebody right outside the office if you're a pastor or something along those lines. But I think, you know, I can definitely see trying to be above reproach. You know, like scripture says that we should try to be, ministers especially should try to be above reproach. Basically meaning that you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's to make sure that people don't think something that may not be true of you, you know? So I do think it's some wisdom to it, you know, if applied correctly and in cases and situations that call for it. So
and the last thing I'll just say, like, if you know that your spouse has some insecurities in relation to like you or his or herself and like their appearance and comparisons and whatnot, like, you know that that's a thing, then like it may just be like the best thing for your marriage. You know what I'm saying? To like have that, have some of those Billy Graham-esque rules in place. So like,
or if you know the person likes you already, like the other person likes you.
Yeah, and let's keep it a buck. Like, or if you're attracted to the other person,
or if you're attracted to them,
and maybe you're not attracted.
True.
Yeah, maybe you're not attracted to them physically. Maybe you're attracted to their work ethic or whatever it is. Like, I think that like, let's say that like you are a go-getter, like you just out there getting it. And your spouse is not. Your spouse is just not that. Because that's just not who he or she is. But with that being said, this male or woman at your job, or this male or woman that you have got frequent, male or woman that you have frequent access to is like, it may end up being a little problematic for you to, you know what I'm saying, like be around that person a good bit. If that's like something that you know that you desire from somebody else, or you feel like this week your spouse's inability in this area is bothering you, it may just make sense like to not have that at that time. So, because it might translate that trait that you like might translate into a romantic attraction. It definitely can. It definitely can. So I just wanted to like say that and make sure we're not just like, you know, going in on the rule the whole time, because like at face value, like it sounds wild, right? One thing I did want to say is that some people will say the Billy Graham rules is the Billy Graham rule says, so like, even if you go to Starbucks with this woman, like you are still in violation of the Billy Graham rule because y'all are still alone. So like I did want to just say that because some people do view that rule as that. So But with that being said,
that's kind of wild to me. But okay.
Hey, I'm just.
What y'all think we gonna do? We in Starbucks. What y'all think we gonna do? Are we gonna put 2 straws in the same drink and just be sitting there?
Hey, bro. Like, hey, you never know.
The Lady and the Hound.
This man.
With the spaghetti.
Yeah, some people would say it's the pregame for the Lady and the Hound. So I'm just saying, like, that's just how some people think. But with that being said, like, and kind of going back to like areas of wondering for the Billy Graham rule, I wonder, like, with that sometimes, like, are you putting a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches? Because I would question that, like, if you are in the same vicinity as somebody of the opposite sex or somebody that you're just attracted to, whatever that may be, somebody that you're just attracted to the point where you may act upon that, like, that's probably a bigger issue. It's probably a bigger lust issue. It's probably a bigger issue in discontentment. It's probably a bigger issue in other areas. And just avoiding that issue or avoiding that struggle that you know is apparent is not necessarily dealing with the issue in itself. It's just kind of kicking the can down the road, or you kind of putting a Band-Aid on something, and eventually it's going eventually it could leak out, because or you could bleed out because you didn't give it the proper treatment that it needed. So that's something that always kind of bothered me with that. And I think that and this is bad. I'm gonna say this right now. This sounds bad, but I spent a little bit of time at the University of Memphis in a PhD program for counseling. And one thing that they said, and it sounded callous, but it was if somebody's going to commit, it wasn't anything that you said that made them do it. It was just that they wanted to do it so badly. They felt that this was freedom for them, that they chose to do it. So as a counselor, you didn't necessarily do anything to make that happen. And I think that a lot of times
unalive themselves.
Yeah. So and a lot of times, if somebody wants to cheat, they're going to cheat. And this is where I think that we get into performative Christianity. And I think that that's ultimately what it leads to. I don't want to be with, not ultimately. I think a lot of times, we can find ourselves in performative actions, being that I don't want it to look like I'm cheating on somebody, but I'm checking every girl out at the gym I see. I don't want it to look like I'm cheating on somebody, but I got access to this on my phone. I don't want it to look I don't want it to look like I'm cheating on my spouse, but I'm watching porn. Right, I don't want it to look like this, but I'm lusting in all these other ways, which Jesus clearly said that is the same thing as adultery.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I think that that's what bothers me the most with some stuff like this, is that I don't like performative Christianity. I don't like it. I just don't like it. I don't like having these great looking Thanksgiving pictures where we all look happy, we all look smiling, but we know that we were arguing the whole time before that and the whole time after those pictures were taken.
Yeah.
So everybody else who walks in can say this. Yeah, everybody else can walk in and be like, man, that these people look so happy in this picture.
Right.
But when you look at this picture, you probably say, man, that was the biggest fight we ever had. Yeah, this was the biggest fight we ever had. And this is and so it means something completely different to you than it does to everybody else. So sometimes I think some of this stuff can be more performative than actually focusing on bettering ourselves as Christians, as people, as citizens. That's my biggest issue with the rule and what it can lead to. Because I'm all about stitches. If you got something that needs stitches, then bro, get some stitches.
Right.
You're gonna bleed out, or you're gonna have some long-term issues if you don't get stitches for this issue.
Yeah.
And I think that that is where I find the biggest cause for pause with the rule to some capacity.
Yeah, which is just basically behavior modification versus heart transformation, right? That's exactly what you're saying, because it's we can continue to modify a person's outward appearance and their behavior, but in their heart, they're still full of lust. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if your heart is full of lust, it's going to come out of you because that's what's in there. So rather the conversation or the main focus should be, hey, what does it look like for this person to get some deliverance from this deep-seated lust that he's dealing with, rather than saying, hey, just don't be alone with any women anymore. There you go. Problem solved. You know what I mean? It's a tough one because I'm all about pragmatism. What practically can we do to make things better? And it seems like that's what the goal is. But, social media and things of that nature, it kind of just another conversation that we had on another episode, just talking about, the rules of engagement. Billy Graham was not around when social media took off. Well, he was 90 something and he passed away. But, social media is here. People are sending messages to pastors now in their DMs like, hey, I need you to pray for my family. I need you to pray for me. Can you pray for me right now? And it's hey, do you just ignore people's issues because they DM'd you? They don't know the rules of the church. You know what I'm saying? And then
and maybe you got and maybe you got a template where it's hey, thank you for this. This is my email address. This is the part. This is how you send me this message. This is who you need to forward in this message. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
And the difficulty
would a person actually do all that? Because you're
that's what I was going to say.
Because that person already, it was probably already hard for that person to be vulnerable in that capacity. And now you're making them add another person who they don't even know. So like, you know
That's
what I'm saying?
it.
So like,
Go to my
so,
secretary. Like it can seem weird,
mhm.
and I know that's tough because I'm not in that position. But I'm sure pastors already deal with that kind of stuff. Like a woman is desperately in need of like an answer or a prayer or something, and she gets an automated message back saying, "Hey, our office hours are blah blah blah. Send us an email here." You know, and then sometimes you're thinking as a pastor, like, okay, all of the women in the church are going to meet with the pastor's wife. All the men are going to meet with the pastor. But that doesn't necessarily mean your wife, if you're a pastor, it don't mean she has counseling gifts, or it doesn't mean that she's good at communication. And, that could be putting an entire burden on her that she's just not even skilled for. And then I think I'm hearing some people say like, hey, well, maybe he just hires a female counselor. And, all of those things, we're trying to figure out practical steps. But at the end of the day, I just feel like pastors need to be able to do their job without there being whispers. If he's really just doing his job, he's not doing anything wrong. People shouldn't be gossiping about the fact that you're in the office alone with a woman. I mean, this is a tough one for me. That's a tough one for me to kind of get all the way on board with.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where like this is like where I land. Like at the end of the day, like if this is the best thing for your marriage, then do this. If this is the best thing for you, then do that. But just don't let it be a band-aid. That's all I ask. Just don't let it be a band-aid. I'm not telling nobody how to live their life. I'm not telling nobody what they should and shouldn't do. All I'm saying is like if you got areas in your life where you know you need to grow, don't put a rule in place that just kicks the can down the road. Like, that's all I say. Don't put a rule in place that just kicks the can down the road. And if you want to do it, like, just for that, then do it. And Absolutely. Lastly, and I meant to say this at the beginning of the episode, and I didn't. I know that lots of people's families have been, for lack of better words, destroyed, changed, become broken homes because somebody or both people decided to cheat on one another. And I know that like that's an area where trauma does exist. So I'm not saying like I want to at least acknowledge you guys because I know that like there can be a reason why some of you guys may have these rules in place because of ways that you've seen it play out long term for your family. So
absolutely
in that, like I just want to say I hear you, I see you, and I'm not telling you what you should and shouldn't do for your family. And if you made it this far, then we appreciate you listening because this probably was a triggering conversation for us to just bring this up, like bring up this case just now.
Absolutely. And, we'll also say prayers to Matt Chandler, and, honestly, man, prayers to every person that's in a leadership position when they're trying to figure this out, because it is a tough situation where, you're just trying to figure out how to engage with people. That's, you're just trying to figure out how to do and be and do the right thing. And I think that's what Matt was trying to do. So prayers to him, man.
Facts. And I think that like our podcast is a platform where we don't claim to know all the answers. We don't know all the answers. That's what we claim. But we do want to just have like legitimate conversations, like with us, sometimes with guests, and just like talk through things. And just talk about it in real time and just see like where we land at the end of the conversation. Like that's what we want to do. So like this is like who we are and this is like what we do. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you got any questions or anything like that, just like hit us up. One or both of us. Just let us know. But man, we appreciate y'all, man. We love y'all. If you could follow us on social media at Unconformed Podcast. Also on Facebook at Unconformed Podcast. Follow the podcast itself. Subscribe. We need that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. You can do it on both. And actually write a review. That's super helpful. If y'all can do that for us, man, please do. If you think this episode would benefit somebody, please send it to them. And man, just help us continue to grow and help us continue to, be obedient in having these conversations.
Absolutely. That's it.
Yeah, for Unconformed Podcast, man, I'm Darius Watkins.
Yep, I'm Ryan Thomas.
Hey, and we out.